You're listening to TGI Sports Talk with your host, Keith Angle, on Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning, everybody. Keith Angle. Live from East Greenbush, New York. Friday, January 22nd. Good morning, Dave Guyette. First man in the room all the time. Welcome, Dave. Good luck to your Buffalo Bills this weekend. Guys, just before I get started, as I like to say, any groups I share this to today, I thank you for the ability to share the content. I guarantee you there'll be relevant content to you. It's another wintry day, kind of dreary. Maybe we're going to get some sunshine, it looks like, at least this morning here in East Greenbush. Been very normal winter here in upstate New York. Not a lot of snow, except for one 30-inch snowstorm, but it's been cold nights, blustery, just dreary, no sunshine. Anyway, I hope it's better where you are. I want to start today by thanking my guest from last week, Eric Soderholm, former Major League Baseball player, third baseman, DH with the Minnesota Twins, the Chicago White Sox, and the New York Yankees. We had a great conversation with Eric. I got some great feedback from some of the fans who remember the 77 Southside Hitmen, where the White Sox kind of saved baseball in Chicago, really. But I got some great feedback from some of the fans that saw that interview in Chicago, or Chicago fans in any way, Chicago White Sox fans. So anyway, thank you for your response. Guys, when I post these videos, I want your comments, good or bad. Keep it clean if you could. Today's guest is Ed Lynch. Ed Lynch, we had a great interview. I did this interview last night. Had a great interview with Ed. Ed played with the Mets for 7.5 years, I think it was. Finished up with the Cubs. Got his law degree. Got in the front office with the Padres to start with. Then he was the GM for the Chicago Cubs. There's some up and down success, but he's got some great insight into the game for the teams that he played for. You know, those lowly Mets when he started in the early 80s, and as they grew into the championship team they became, which he sadly missed out on, which we touch on. And he played with some great, great players, guys. Darryl Strawberry, Keith Hernandez, Tom Seaver. Spent a year with Tom Seaver. Gary Carter. I can't list them all here. Played for some of the great managers in the game. Joe Torre, before Joe Torre was Joe Torre. Bob Gibson was his pitching coach. He called him his attitude coach. Interesting choice of words, I thought. So anyway, there's a lot of insight that Ed will share here today. So we're going to play that interview for you today as we look forward to a great weekend of football, by the way. But we're going to concentrate on some baseball as we're going to do more going forward on today's show. We've done a lot of former baseball players anyway. It's kind of my niche, and I love it. And I hope you do. So with that, I'm going to play the interview from Ed Lynch, and I'll be back to finish up the show. At the end, we'll talk about next week's guest, Tom Keegan, and we'll go from there. So bear with me a second while I mentioned in my intro, my guest today is Ed Lynch. Ed was a pitcher with the New York Mets, Chicago Cubs, general manager with the Cubs, actually front office person with a lot of teams in Major League Baseball. So I want to say good morning, Ed. How are you?
Good morning, Keith. How are you?
I am excellent. You know, it's funny, as I was reading about you, Ed, you kind of you moved around quite a bit. Well, I don't know if it was move around quite a bit, but you were born in Brooklyn, you raised in Westchester County, not too far from where we are, a couple hours away. I'm in East Greenbush, New York. But you graduated in Miami from high school. Your family moved at some point to Florida, I take it?
Yeah, my dad worked for IBM from 1953 to 1968 in their really formative years. And IBM stands for I've been moved. That's the inside joke in the company. It was a great company. They took great care of the employees and their families. So, I started in Brooklyn, born in Bay Ridge. My dad worked in Manhattan. Then he got transferred up to Westchester County. We went to Portchester for 6 years. And then he got another promotion, and we went to Poughkeepsie, where he was the controller of their largest manufacturing plant in the world back in the 60s. So we went up to Poughkeepsie for 3 years. Then he got another promotion to their headquarters in Armonk, New York. And we moved to Mamaroneck, and we're getting busy from all the moves. And then a year later, he gets a call from a corporate headhunter and becomes chief financial officer of Eastern Airlines. And some people our age remember Eastern. It's amazing how many young people don't remember Eastern. Eastern was an absolutely huge domestic carrier, mostly domestic, did a lot of Latin America. So we went to Florida in 68 when I was starting 8th grade, and I went to 8th grade in high school in Miami, and then it was off to college from there.
Gosh, you were almost like an Army brat, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
So with all that moving around, who did you root for when you were a kid? Who was your team?
Oh, I was a Met fan, a Yankee fan, a Ranger fan, Knick fan. And, I don't want to say the ironic thing about it, but the tragic thing about it was, my brother and I were both huge Met, Knick, and Jet fans. And the year we moved to Florida, all three of them won the world championship. Wow. And it wasn't back in the day where there was no ESPN back then. So we never got to, we watched every Met game on TV, every Ranger game, every Knick game. Back then everything was free television, and it created just massive fan bases. And so we watched every Met game, every Yankee game we could. Really, we were fanatic Ranger fans. And, I love the Jets, Joe Willie. And the nice thing about when we moved to Florida is that I was able to attend Super Bowl III. I was 12 years old, and I still have the tickets, $10 upper deck.
Oh, that's cool.
I was at the game with Joe Willie Namath when they beat the Colts. I'll never forget it.
You're the first guy I've talked to that's ever been at that game. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah. Well, there were about 80,000 of us, or 70,000. So.
Yeah. That's got to be a great memory for you.
Yeah, it really is. It really is a great memory. And in my mind's eye, I still remember the Colts going down the field, the first drive, and the lineman they had. Back then, linemen would kick, or backup quarterbacks.
Lou Michaels, wasn't it?
Lou Michaels.
Yeah.
Jim Turner was the Dolphin kick. The Jet kicker.
Yeah.
And I remember they marched right down the field. They stalled on the 20-yard line, and Lou Michaels got up there and hit a frickin' shank knuckleball about 2 miles to a wide left. And I said, wow, that helps, And so it was a great day for Jet fans, and for me. I was a big Jet fan.
If you're still a Jet fan, then my sympathies go out. That's the end of your.
Well, when we moved to Miami in 1968, 69, the Dolphins were not very good. But the next year, Don Shula came in, and by the time I was in high school, my senior year in high school, they were undefeated. Yeah. And so we quickly became the front runner that I was. I quickly became a Dolphin fan.
Interesting. Well, as you go through school, you become a highly recruited athlete to Division I sports, but not to the sport you ended up playing in professionally. Interestingly enough, you were a basketball standout, right?
Yeah, that's right. I really enjoyed the game of basketball. The bright lights and the competition. I was recruited at South Carolina by a guy named Bobby Cremens, who was one of their graduate assistants, and he flew down to Miami and watched me play. And I was a big fan of Frank McGuire and I didn't know Bobby Cremens very well, but a guy named Kevin Joyce was my idol when I was in high school. He was a senior at South Carolina when I was a senior in high school. So I went there to play basketball, and I went there as a 17-year-old kid. I was really young. I didn't turn 17 until February 25th of my senior year in high school. So wow. I went in there, and I'm trying to guard guys like Alex English in practice. Mike Dunleavy was one guard. Brian Winters was the other guard. And but I got better in a hurry. I'll tell you what it was. We were 22-4 my freshman year, and And then my second year, they brought in 6 or 7 more All-Americans. And I went to Frank and I said, Frank McGuire, I said, Coach, I really would like to concentrate on baseball. He said, hey, I like baseball. Go ahead. Keep your scholarship. Or go ahead and play baseball. I mean, that was pre-Title IX days. So
Yeah, right.
there was unlimited number of scholarships for men's sports.
Well, that's an awesome. I mean, it was a great move as it turned out for you. I think you were drafted 3 different times. Is that correct?
No, I was only drafted once.
No,
my brother was drafted 3 times. Once
maybe
in
I
high
mixed up
school,
the two when I was
twice
reading.
in junior college. But yeah, back then it wasn't like today. I mean, there was no real mass coverage. And I remember we were in the middle of the regionals in 1977. And I was a college senior. And I remember being in the athletic dorm in the line for lunch, and one of my teammates came up and said, "Hey, man, you just got drafted by the Texas Rangers." And I was like, "You're kidding! I had no idea."
You had no expectations of being a
No,
professional?
I didn't. My junior year, I was like 10-1 or 10-0, and I didn't get drafted. So, and I didn't know till later that I couldn't get drafted as a junior because I wasn't old enough. I was only 20 years old, and I had to be 21-year-old junior to get drafted. So I was 10-0 on a team that went to the regional finals. I won a game in the regionals and didn't get drafted. I was shocked. And I said, well, I guess I'm just not cut out for professional baseball. So my senior year, I really didn't have any expectations.
Interesting. So the Rangers pick you, and you spend a couple years in the minors there, and you end up in a trade back to your hometown.
Yeah, that was quite a shock. I remember when I signed in 77, went to rookie ball. I didn't pitch all that well. I went home. I thought I was going to get released. I sat down with my dad, and he said, okay, if you get released, we'll go right into the IBM training program. And I said, fine, but I want to give it one more shot. So being in Miami, I threw all winter long, went into camp in 78, had a great camp, made the A-ball club. Had a really good year, 4 months in A-ball, and then got promoted to Double-A and went 5-2 in Double-A. And then the next year, I made the Triple-A team in Tucson, and I pitched, I thought, very well in the PCL, which was a very tough pitchers league back then. And I came home after the 79 season, and I'm sitting in my dad's house, and the phone rings, and it's Joe Klein, who was the minor league director of the Rangers. And to show what a genius I was, he said, well, Ed, we just made a trade with the Mets. And I'm thinking, well, why is he telling me this? Why is he telling me all this? I went, oh. Says, yeah, we just traded you to the Mets. And I was excited for a lot of reasons. Number one, I was a New Yorker. My parents were absolutely thrilled.
Yeah.
My whole family's from Brooklyn. And number two, the Mets were terrible. So, I thought I might get a better chance there because the Rangers were not a bad club in 79, but the Mets were awful.
Yeah, that was kind of my next question. What was it like playing for those? I mean, those early 80 Mets were just, like you said, under Joe Torre before Joe Torre was actually, the Hall of Fame manager.
Before he was Joe Torre.
What was it like?
Well, you know what, Keith, when you're a young player and, you're just trying to survive, it's funny. I came to the big leagues and I never pitched in relief in the minor leagues, I don't believe. And I came to the big leagues, and I came in for 1 inning relief in Candlestick Park. The day I joined the team there, I flew across the country from Norfolk to San Francisco. Went in relief, gave up 4 runs. I was a nervous wreck. And then I sat and didn't pitch for 13 days in a row. And we lost 13 straight games.
Wow.
So after about 10 games, we're at Shea Stadium. I'll never forget it. I walked into Joe Torre's office. I talked to my dad. He says, get in there and find out what's going on. So took a deep breath, went into Joe's office. I said, Joe, am I ever going to pitch again? He goes, you're pitching Saturday against the Cubs. This is like Thursday. So I hadn't been in a game in 2 weeks. So I went out on Saturday, September 13th, 1980, and I won. I beat the Cubs. Got a base hit. It was like one of it's in the top 5 best days of my career. I was staying with an uncle in Staten Island, and remember after the game, going back to his neighborhood, and all the neighborhood kids were there. Then I was on the local news. I think Sal Marciano was talking about me, and I just thought that was the greatest thing ever. And my pitching was spotty. We were a bad club, but I had one really, really good start in Philadelphia against the soon-to-be world champion Phillies. So through 7 shutout innings, we lost in 10. But, I got my feet wet, and that was.
What was so tell us about little about Joe Torre before he was Joe Torre. What was he like as a manager in 1980, 81?
Oh, he was rough. I'll tell you, he was rough on young players. I think every manager back then treated young players. I remember he called you in and say, "I don't ever want to see you going anywhere with veterans. You stay away from them, and you take care of what you got to take care of. Those guys have been here. You don't hang around with them." And then in 81, he hires an attitude coach, a guy by the name of Bob Gibson. And you talk about a tough, rough customer, God rest his soul.
Yeah.
But it was a great help for me because that's where I think playing basketball at South Carolina, getting the living crap beat out of me every day in practice, I get myself off the floor and I just keep fighting. And it taught me to keep fighting. And, growing up with an older brother that was pretty rough on me, that helped. So I thrived with Bob Gibson. He was he was borderline abusive, and you could talk to anybody that was there then. I'm not making this up. I mean, at this time he was probably 45 years old, maybe older, maybe closer to 50. Great shape, could still throw the hell out of the ball. So we would have like pitchers bunting practice. He'd be out there throwing balls under your chin and throwing breaking balls. I mean, you can ask the guys that were there. It was rough, and but it made me tough. And God forbid if he ever saw you talking to a player on the other team while you're in uniform, oh boy, he'd embarrass you in front of the entire club. So that was one thing that stuck with me. I never talked to guys on the other team. Once you're out on the field, I see guys slow dancing behind second base during batting practice now, and I'm like, thank God Bob Gibson's not witnessing that.
It is such a different game. It's funny because I was paying attention to a Facebook conversation that one of my early guests I had on, Greg Pryor. I don't know if you
sure. Greg. Yeah, sure.
He created a character himself. He was a great guest himself. But they were going back and forth, and he talked about the same kind of thing. And then in your guys' era, that was unheard of to fraternize.
Hey, I remember sitting at my locker in 1980. And we had an outfielder. I think it was Jose Moreno, an outfielder, Dominican kid, nice guy, good player. And he was in the locker right next to mine. His English wasn't great. And he says, "What's this?" And he hands me a letter from the commissioner. "You have been fined $300 for fraternizing." I remember the letter. And I said, "Were you talking to anybody like last homestand on the field?" "Oh, yeah, my friend Dominica. I said, "Well, turns out Frank Pulley, the umpire, was standing right behind home plate, that tunnel behind home plate at Shea, where the grounds crew room was. Frank Pulley would come out, and he'd just stand there during batting practice, and he'd see guys talking to each other. The gates are open. You're talking to a guy on the other team. That's fraternizing." They used to fine guys for that.
That's too funny.
Yeah, and boy, if you did it now, the commissioner's office would be rolling in dough. I'll tell you that.
Oh yeah, you'd be funding the whole players' retirement fund for crying out loud.
That's right. You're funding the pension fund.
Right. Well, those teams, as we said, weren't very good, but there were some talented guys on those teams. Lee Mazzilli was on those teams. Young Mookie Wilson. I mean, a very young. Well, Dave Kingman. Tell me, I got to ask you about Dave Kingman. Well, what was it like playing with him?
Dave was a very shy guy, and he had very strong beliefs about certain things. And, I would have hated to seen Frank Howard and or Dave Kingman on steroids. I mean, that would have been something like a Marvel comic movie. I mean, Dave Kingman used to hit balls so hard. I mean, you'd flinch. It's like being at a football game. They shoot off a cannon without you knowing. I mean, and you jump. The sound of the ball off his bat was different than any other player. But he was such a nice, gentle, warm-hearted, generous guy to his teammates. But boy, he had strong ideas about the media, and boy, about women in the clubhouse. He did not like that at all. There were a lot of guys back in that era. They were very old-fashioned, and when women started coming into our clubhouse, it rubbed a lot of guys the wrong way. I know Dale Murphy to this day takes a lot of grief about it because he was very outspoken. He was a very religious guy. I mean, I think he might have been a Mormon, and Dave was the same way, but Dave didn't handle it too well. I think he sent a female writer a rat in a gift wrap box or something like that.
Yeah, that's probably not the politically correct way.
No, that's probably not the best way to approach it. But he was a great teammate.
Well, that's
And
interesting. It's interesting that some guys can get that reputation as being bad actors, right? But they aren't. Their teammates don't think so, but the outside world will because of the way it's reported.
yeah, and the writers were rough on him. I mean, he was not a very good defensive player, and he struck out a lot. This is when strikeouts were not very acceptable like they are now.
Yeah.
This guy would hit 210 and hit 38 home runs, drive in 100 runs, and strike out. Well, he never struck out 200 times because that was still a record when I was a GM. But he'd strike out 160 times. Now you could fill up a stadium with guys that strike out 160 times. And Dave, like I said, was a shy guy and just didn't want to be bothered with a lot of the. He was like the anti Gary Carter. I mean, you talk about a 180-degree different personality. You got those two guys.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Carter. I mean, as you guys went through those early 80s, things started to change a little bit. Strawberry gets called up. Keith Hernandez gets traded to the ball club. Carter gets traded to the ball club. Davey Johnson takes over as the manager. Things start to change in New York.
Yeah, I think the big thing, it all started with the Keith Hernandez trade.
Yeah.
That was what manifested itself at the major league level. It really started when they were able to trade, and I love Lee Mazzilli, but when you can trade a Lee Mazzilli and get Walt Terrell and Ron Darling, two young pitchers who within 2 years are going to throw 200 innings in your rotation at the age of like 22, 23. I mean, that's one of the greatest trades in the history of the Mets. I love Maz, but, let's face facts. What is the value of a Ron Darling or a Walt Terrell being 23 years old and throwing 200 innings with an ERA around 3? I mean, those guys are worth their weight in gold. I mean, that's how you win championships.
Yeah.
That's what started it. And I remember going to spring training. It was near the end of spring training in '82, and we had an assistant GM by the name of Lou Gorman. And there was a bunch of writers around, and I saw Maz, and Maz was a great teammate and a great person. I loved him. And I said to Lou, Lou, what's going on over there? He says, we just made a deal, and we traded Maz for 2 guys. I said, who are they? I had no idea who they were. I was a player, and these guys were in the minor leagues. And I said, well, who's the marquee guy in that deal? He goes, this guy named Ron Darling. He's going to be a matinee idol. I remember he said that. And I remember thinking, are we filming movies or are we trying to get people out, But what Ronnie had great stuff. I mean, they talk about Dwight Gooden and how hard he threw. Ronnie was one tier below that. Ronnie threw gas, and he had a hammer curveball, and he was a tough competitor. He looked like a pretty boy, and we give him crap about it, but boy, was he a tough competitor. And Walt Terrell was like your, lunch pail and a 24-ounce beer guy. He'd go out there and throw power sinkers and breaking ball. And Walt could really hit. And then they turned Walt Terrell into Howard Johnson.
Yeah.
And Howard Hojo became a 30-30 guy. So you talk about a deal where you get 2 young starting pitchers, then you turn one of them into an all-star who's a 30-30 guy. I mean, the Mets really had it going in all the major acquisition areas to make a ball club better. Number one is the draft. They drafted so many good players. Every year I came into spring training, here's another guy throwing 100 miles an hour, hitting balls 500 feet. You're talking about Darryl Strawberry, Billy Beane. You've got Roger McDowell. You got Lenny Dykstra. You've got Roger McDowell, Lenny Dykstra, Mike Fitzgerald, Kevin Mitchell.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about MVP caliber guys in the draft. And then Doug Sisk, and then you turn around and then you talk about trades, and then you've got Walt Terrell and Ron Darling and Keith Hernandez, and then you talk about free agency, and they signed George Foster, and George, his timing was bad because he was a great player on a terrible team, and they dumped all the expectations on him. But when we traded for Gary Carter, that kind of put us over the top. So in all 3 facets of making your club better, the Mets excelled.
Well, you said that, all that young talent, and then they brought in some seasoned veterans and really good ball players at the same time. And it just all came together. And Davey Johnson obviously had to have been a big part of that
Davey was outstanding. You know, he had a lot of those guys at AAA. He knew them. He was a great communicator. Nobody managed better than Davey in 84, 85, and I was only there for half of 86, but he was outstanding. And he'd walk around the outfield during batting practice and talk to every player individually. He treated me with great respect because I was 28 years old, 27 years old. I was one of the oldest guys on the staff.
Yeah.
You know, Dwight Gooden shows up. He's 19, punching out 280 guys. I'm 28, and he was our leader, you know. Then the next year, I'm 29. He's 20, dominating the league. And, you know, Ron Darley at that time was 23, 24. Walt Terrell was in his early 20s. You know, I mean, we had I remember in 84, I think we had like 17 or 18 single guys, you know. I mean, and that was unheard of, you know.
Right.
And that's why it was exciting on the road when you have 17 single guys running around.
Back to Davey for a second. I mean, has there ever been a manager that has not gotten his due like Davey John? I mean, there probably has, but Davey all he did every place he went was win, and he just never seems to get his due.
Yeah, you know, it's you know, is he a Hall of Fame caliber manager? I don't know. I mean, I look at guys like Tony La Russa and I see Hall of Fame managers. But is he that second? Is he one tier down? Yeah, I think so. I mean, he didn't win a lot of, you know, manager of the years. I mean, he got hit with that label. Oh, he's got great players. You know,
Yeah.
He should win. You know, and so sometimes the hardest thing to do is win with great players. I know it sounds silly, but the expectations are there. Maybe those players aren't as great as you think, or you know, you sign a bunch of free agents and now you have an all-star team and you don't win and they blame the manager. But, you know, Davey was really good at blending players in. He knew what he was doing and he communicated what he was doing. He gave us a vision, a roadmap, all the things you do as a manager, and he was really good at it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned too, you know, Strawberry and Gooden as young guys coming up, and you're a bit more seasoned veteran. I mean, obviously you had to see the potential in these guys, but
more than potential. I mean, they came up immediately.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, were there any signs though then of what was going to happen to these guys down the road? Ed?
No, no, not really. I mean, when I was there, I left in the middle of 86 and I was on a rehab assignment because I had knee surgery. So I was there 84, 85, basically. 83, you know, with Darryl for half of 83, then 84, 85. You know, they lived in one area of Long Island. I lived in the city, and, you know, and I never saw any indication. I remember when I got traded to the Cubs and in the middle of 86, and I went over there, and in next spring, I'm out here in Arizona in spring training. It's 1987, and I get on the bus. I think we're going to the airport to go to Denver. We're going to play the Padres 2 games and then go wherever we're going to go to open the season. And I get on the bus. It's not like now where you have a TV in your hand with your phone and you're watching Sports Center. Somebody says, "Hey, did you hear Dwight Gooden came out and admitted he's doing cocaine? He's going to rehab." I said, "Okay, ha ha ha." It was April 1st, and I said, "Yeah, okay. What's the punchline? You know, April Fool's Day." And they said, "No, I'm serious." And I was in absolute shock because Dwight was our leader, you know.
Yeah.
And I wasn't around him the second half of 86. I think he'd started to show a little bit then, but I wasn't around. And I pitched against Dwight in 86 at Wrigley Field, and his stuff had gone backwards. It wasn't the same guy. But I didn't think anything of it because he had thrown 200, 500 innings his first 2 years as a teenager and a 20-year-old, you know. I did not have any indication. You know, hindsight's 20/20, but you ask anybody in 85, were these guys going to have problems? Nah, I don't think anybody would have said yes.
Yeah, and it's really a shame what happened because those are 2 great careers derailed there that, you know, really shouldn't have happened, but that's the way life goes. It's you know.
And you know what? The organizations, you know, Jay Horowitz did a great job trying to protect those guys, but the organization really didn't do a lot to protect those guys. I remember when Dwight made the club in 84. I mean, he had nowhere to go when we got to New York, and I took him out. You know, he's making the minimum. He's probably making, you know, 45 grand or something. And I'm thinking with taxes. And so I'm showing him these apartments in Queens that are not the nicest,
Yeah.
But it's something he could afford. He got on me later and says, geez, Lynch, you brought me to the projects. I said, I'm just trying to help you find something you could afford. Now he goes out and lights the world on fire. After a month, he's got money coming out of his ears because he's got all these endorsements and people throwing money at him. And he got a nice place in Port Washington, wherever. But I had to take him out to find him a place to live. I mean, that's how far we've come in this sport. Not only the minimum salary is $500, almost $600,000, but they have support staffs now. My first 3 games in the big leagues, I think I wore a different number each time with no name on the back.
Yeah,
if you do that to a young player now, his agent be yelling and screaming. I didn't even have an agent.
I thought it was funny when I was looking at some stuff on the Baseball Reference, and I saw all these different numbers for Ed Lynch. I'm like, he only played for 2 teams.
I know. Well, we went to San Francisco. I wore number 35, I think, or 34. Then I wore 35 when we got home, and then I took then I was 30 something on. Then I got 36 in 81, I think, and then I wore that number for 5 years. But yeah, I mean, the clubhouse guy was terrible. He was terrible. I remember Herbie Norman was his name, and I hope he doesn't have relatives listening, but it was like that all around the league. And I remember we didn't have coffee in the home clubhouse. And one of our pitchers, Tom Hausman, God rest his soul, he brought a Mr. Coffee into the clubhouse and to make coffee. And Herbie Norman had a fit, screaming and yelling. So we all started screaming at Herbie, and he went into his room and locked the door because we'd have to go to the concession stand and get coffee. There was no post-game food or anything like that, or pre-game, nothing. You had to bring your own food and put it in the fridge, and somebody would steal it. Okay. So it was a totally different world back then. And so getting back to the reason I'm saying that, I mean, when Darryl really took it worse than Dwight. Darryl just got thrown out there. And I remember his first couple weeks in the big leagues, we had Strawberry Sunday. First 15,000 people get a Strawberry Sunday. And I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on a kid. And I remember when he came to the big leagues, I remember in the back page of the Daily News or the Post was Darryl Save Us. I mean, you're talking about a 22-year-old kid who, is coming up to a bad team, and he's a right fielder, So I think they learned their lesson with Darryl in '83, because in '84, Dwight had a little more protection and Jay had a little more power. You couldn't talk to Dwight until after he pitched, because if you let him in there, they'd be chasing him around 7 days a week. So, but Darryl was thrown to the wolves basically, but Dwight got a lot more protection.
Well, going back to the manager a little bit in that case, Ed, I mean, is it different for Dwight a little bit because Davey Johnson's a manager and not George Bamberger and Frank Howard? Or?
No, I think they were all the same. I mean, back then, Davey was busy with, Davey had 25 guys around his desk every day. He had his hands full. He can't be out there, managing the media with all his players, Yeah. And so, I mean, it was the way the game was, It was just, you're on your own, and going to New York, making 36.5, after taxes, you're taking home, maybe a couple grand a month, and you're trying to live in New York. I mean, I remember living at a really cheap motel out on the island with Tim Leary in 1981. And we'd share a room. And we just count the days till you go on the road, because you stay at the nicest hotel in town in Chicago or Houston, and they give you a packet full of $20 bills for meal money. We thought that was the greatest thing ever. And so we used to look forward to going on the road, because at home was so rough. And you had no money. You're living in a bad place. It was tough. It was not easy in those days.
Yeah, I'd like to see some of these guys today live like that, right?
Yeah. Good luck with that.
There wouldn't be any Major League Baseball. So, you were a productive player through those years. I mean, you weren't the best pitcher on the staff, right? But you had productive years.
Sure. I mean, I don't think I was ever the best pitcher on any staff I was on after high school, but I was right in the middle. And the big thing, Keith, is I stayed I stayed healthy. I didn't get hurt, and I threw strikes. I didn't walk people. I didn't strike people out. Back then, you were judged on if you got people out or not on your spin rate or your velocity.
Yeah.
Do you get people out? Do you give your club a chance to win? Do you take pressure off the bullpen? Do you eat up innings, in whatever role you're in? So when I was on those staffs in the mid 80s, on those great pitching staffs, I mean, you're talking about one of the best pitching staffs in the second half of the 20th century in the National League. When you look at that 85, 86, and I knew I'd have to battle to stay in the rotation. But if I wasn't in the rotation, I'm not going to sit there and pout. I'd make myself useful.
Yeah.
So I was a staff saver. So if Ron Darling or Dwight Gooden or Sid Fernandez go out and they're up 10-0 after 7 and they need somebody to pitch the last 2 innings to give those guys, I'd do it. Sure. I didn't take him, I did what I thought was best for the team, and that's how I survived.
Yeah. And you talked about, the fact that you stayed healthy, and it's kind of ironic that when you did get hurt in 86, tore a ligament, you're on the disabled list, and once you get healthy, you get traded, and you miss out on the ultimate, a world championship season. I can't imagine how it must have felt to have gone through those years that you went through and miss out on that.
Well, the quote I had was Marty Noble asked me how I felt. And I said, well, it's like living with the family all year, getting thrown out on Christmas Eve. And I really felt like that. And, but, I got a ring. I got a half share. The ring I'll cherish forever. My family will cherish it. And the reason I got a ring, and Frank is gone now, but Frank Cashin, there's many guys who were on that 86 team that did not get rings, call-ups that contributed late. Frank was very stingy with those rings. And the reason I got one is because when I got traded, I was there for 5.5 years, and I kept my mouth shut and I worked hard.
Yeah.
And, but I got baited by the media when I got, do you feel like you've been treated unfairly? How, is this a slap in the face, you getting traded? And I just, no, I'm just, it's the greatest organization on earth. I understand it's a business. Because my feeling was, if I start whining about getting traded, I'm telling everybody I'm so stupid and naive that I don't understand it's a business, that I look like an idiot. So I knew I could get traded. Now, behind closed doors, was a different story.
Yeah.
I was very upset. But I think I'm the only guy that pitched for that team. I pitched an inning and 2/3 or 2 1/3 in Philadelphia. And after the game, my knee was the size of a bowling ball. And then a few months later, I pitched against them. So I pitched for them again and against them. I started a game against Dwight, I think in July or August of that year at Wrigley Field. And Keith Hernandez hit a home run off me and kind of beat me. And then 4 months later, he's in my wedding. So strange year. It was a really strange year.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like a little. Well, I guess I won't compare it to 2020, but it was a 2020 year for Ed Lynch then, I guess. But
yeah, this year has been just. Last year was just awful.
Yeah. So you move on to the Cubs, and your career ended fairly soon afterwards. I mean, you never really probably got. I'm assuming you didn't get healthy enough to really.
Well, I pitched good in the second half of 86. I won 7 games. And then in 87, I really got used a lot. I pitched 110 innings in relief, and my arm was not right, and my knee was not right. And I was just beaten up. I was only 32, but I'd had enough. And, if I'd gone down to AAA and regroup, but I wanted to do something else with my life by then, I had just gotten married. I got married in November of 86 after the season. 87 was not a good year. We finished last again. And, I got taken off the major league roster, and I was going to have to go to AAA. I went to spring training in 88 with the Red Sox, got released the last day, and I didn't want to go to AAA. I really didn't. And I went to AAA for 1 game. My heart wasn't in it. Gave up a ton of runs and just said, I'm done, and went home. And 3 months later, I started law school. So, I had a lot to do with my life still coming.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day, or this summer when Whitey Ford died. Here's a guy who was the idol of millions. But if you think about it, the guy stopped working in 1966.
Yeah.
And people still talk about him like he's still out there pitching. He's not.
Yeah.
You have this burst of 15 years where you're a star, and now for the rest of your life, people talk about those 15 years in your life. And I wanted to accomplish something else in my life after I retired as a baseball player.
Well, you certainly did. I mean, just the fact that you got your law degree after all that time is very impressive. I have to congratulate you just on that. But so you get your law degree and you end up going into, the front office in Major League Baseball. I think first with the Padres, if I'm right.
That's right.
I guess what turned you in that direction?
Well, I fully intended to practice law. I was working hard. I was at the University of Miami, and Joe McIlvaine was, Joe and I were friends when I was a player, and he was a scouting director, and I think assistant GM when I left. When I got traded to the Cubs, he wrote me a long letter. I still have it, and it meant a lot to me. Joe and I were very close. We would talk players, and I remember he would go on some trips with us, and nobody knew who he was, and I knew who he was. I mean, he was a big name in the game. He was a rising star, and so him and I would talk about players, and we'd laugh. And I remember when I was in law school, after my second year, I called him up and I said, "Hey, Joe, do you mind if I come up to Port St. Lucie spring break?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure, come on up." So I drove up there. My dad had a condo close by at Hutchinson Island. So my wife and I would go up there. I'd leave her at the beach, and I'd go drive over to Port St. Lucie, and I'd walk around the complex for 2 days with Joe. And then, I go back to school. This is August. School will be starting in the fall. And, and then, excuse me, then I go back after spring break. And then my last year, I went full time during the summer too. So I graduated in December, but in September of 1990, I think it was 1990, Joe says, "Hey, Ed, do you have a break coming up?" I said, "Yeah, I do. I have a break coming up in September between the end of the summer session and the start of my last semester in September of 90. So he goes, "Hey, I got you an interview with the commissioner and both league presidents in New York. Are you interested in that?" I said, "Absolutely." So I flew up to New York, and I went in and I sat down with Gene Budig and with Bill White. That's when they had presidents of the league.
Yeah.
And then the highlight was I sat down with Bart Giamatti, the GM. The commissioner.
Yeah.
And I remember the first thing he said to me, he was a linguist. And I'm going to use some language here, but it's his language. And he said,
fair enough.
First he said, "What's it mean, a can of corn?" I said, "Well, it connotates an easy fly ball. A grocer back in the grocery store would knock a can of corn off the top shelf. It was an easy catch." He goes, "Good answer." And then he said something to this day I tell people and they laugh. He says, "What's worse, horse shit or brutal?" And I said, "Oh, brutal, Mr. Commissioner." And he goes, and I go, "There's only one thing worse than brutal." He goes, "What's that?" I said, "Fucking brutal, like some of your umpires." Oh, and he got the biggest kick out of that and laughed and laughed. And the last thing he asked me, he says, "If you were me, what would you do with Pete Rose?" And I said, "Well, I think Rule 21 is pretty specific, Mr. Commissioner, and I think the rule is there for a reason. And if the evidence is there that he broke a rule that we all know about, then the punishment should fit the crime." And he slammed his fist down and said, "Good answer." And so I left. And I remember, Keith, he was chain smoking. I mean, we've all heard about chain smoking. The reason of chain, because you have a chain of cigarettes, you're lighting one with with another.
Sure.
Never not have one lit. He was chain smoking, and his face was the pallor of a dark gray. And I remember thinking, boy, this is not a healthy man. And when I flew home 2 days later, and about 5 days after that, he dropped dead in Martha's Vineyard in Labor Day.
Just a few days after suspended.
Right out, like less than a week after I sat down with him.
Yeah.
And now they blamed Pete Rose for killing him. But I think the cigarettes had more to do with it.
Well, I'm starting to think Pete Rose ought to be talking to you about his suspension, and I don't know.
I love Pete. I have the utmost respect for Pete as a player. I do think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. I'm sorry, I'm changing my tune. I would never say 20 years ago, I would have never said that. But now he belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I always thought he did, warts and all, I mean.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people in the Hall of Fame who were just awful people and racist and just not good people. And I think Pete's his own worst enemy, though. What a great player. The numbers, he got more hits than anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I mean, really, come on.
Yeah, you can't argue the whether he's deserving as a contributor to the game.
Absolutely.
So, so your travels in the front office take you to finally you end up as a GM of a club yourself in Chicago.
Yeah.
And you inherited not a very good team.
No, that's why you're there. You know,
Right.
you don't
get a
become
job
the GM of the defending world champion usually, unless you're the Red Sox and they fired Dave Dombrowski when they're defending world champions.
Yeah.
You're usually there because they're not doing well. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, we took over a club that wasn't the greatest. It was a dream come true. We're coming off the strike. So my first year as GM, we've got replacement players, which in retrospect was one of the dumbest ideas you could ever think of. And I remember we had a meeting, myself, Jim Riggleman, and our big league staff, and at the end of spring, and we're talking about the replacement players, and I'm asking the manager who he likes, and he goes, I like Joe Housey in the setup role. And I'm sitting there rubbing my head. Joe Housey at that time was our amateur scout in South Florida. And I'm thinking, I'm waiting my whole life to get this job, and my setup guy is an area scout in the organization. And luckily they came to their senses and got that thing done right before the season started. And then we went back and had another spring and didn't start the season to the last week in April. And we played 144 games with a very short spring training, and we were fine. Everything went fine. So I think spring training's probably too long. Season's probably too long, because 95 was perfect,
Yeah. I mean, again, and you had a winning season that year.
Yeah, we did. We did well.
And
We went down to the last weekend.
Yeah, and a couple years later, you actually got the Cubs to the playoffs for the first time in, I don't know, almost a decade, probably.
Yeah.
What was working for the Cubs? I mean, a historic organization, but obviously not known for winning until recently.
Well, you think about it. We were the third largest market in baseball. You've got New York, LA, then Chicago.
Yeah.
But our revenues weren't anywhere close to the third highest revenues in baseball, because we had Wrigley Field. We had no signage. We had no parking. We're all owned by the same company. The team, the television broadcast entity, the radio entity, WGN Radio, WGN Television. We're selling our rights within the company at discount prices. Let's face it. They call it synergy, but WGN is having record profits on the TV side, and we're not maximizing our revenues. And I think after I left, Andy McPhail was smart enough to start selling pieces of those broadcast rights out to different entities, and all of a sudden the revenues went through the roof. So we might have been the third largest market, but we were probably somewhere, in the bottom of the top third in revenues, and we weren't gonna. It's not like you're owned by an individual, a sportsman. Can't go to George Steinbrenner with all his revenues and say, hey, let's sign this free agent. We had planning meetings in November. They said, here's the number you have. You work on your payroll is this.
Yeah.
And if you get to July 31st, you could probably go in and ask for more, but it wasn't like one guy owned the team like Fred Wilpon and you want to add a guy, no, it was very corporate, very structured. You had your number and you had to stick to it. Plus we're coming off the strike, and our revenues were down because we weren't drawn. I remember early in 95, I remember I went to our ticket guy, John McDonough. He was the head of marketing and broadcasting, and I said, hey, is there any chance I can rent a booth, a luxury suite for this weekend? I got a lot of family coming in town, and He goes, yeah, pick which one do you want? We had several that were open for a weekend series against a good club. That was early in '95 because we're coming off the strike, and let's face it, the fans were pissed off.
Yeah.
And
I know.
so it was a different time then, and then by '98, we're sold out every game and hey, can I get a luxury suite this weekend? What are you, out of your mind? With Sammy and McGuire and that whole show. So
What was that like for you to go through that summer of what summer? 98?
98, yeah. It was an unbelievable year. The first thing that happened is Harry Carey passed away on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1998. And I remember flying into Chicago for his funeral. Spring training had already started. And it was like being on the Tonight Show. His funeral was like the Tonight Show. We got guys up there cracking jokes. Everybody's laughing. I got TV camera in the pew next to me in a Catholic church. And it was unbelievable. Then we go back to Arizona. And then Sammy starts his thing. And then I bring up a young right-hander in May. In his third or fourth start, he punches out 20 guys. Kerry Wood.
Great player.
And then Sammy hits 20 home runs in June. And then that whole thing with Mark McGuire started. And then, we had the tightest pennant race ever for the wild card. I think the last 6 weeks, and we never were separated by more than a game and a half. Us, the Giants, and the Mets. And I remember we did coin flips. This is how primitive it was back then. I remember I was on a conference call in September. We were in San Diego, and we had a better record, head-to-head record against the Mets than they had against us. Same thing with the Giants. So we're going to do coin flips, okay? So we're going to flip. I thought for sure that the Mets were going to, if we had a tie, it was going to be the Mets because the Giants were scuffling then. And the Mets were a good club. And I remember they said, okay, Mets, Cubs, call it. I said heads. It was tails. So the Mets won that flip. I went, oh, geez, we got to go to Shea Stadium now to play them. And then as an afterthought, they said, okay, going to get through the lineup 3 times when you're trying to strike out. You have a 2-2 pitch on the 8-hole hitter with the pitcher on deck, and you're bouncing breaking balls because you want to strike him out.
A lot of guys like Catfish Hunter made to the Hall of Fame pitching to contact their whole career, right?
You got it. And you know what? God rest his soul, Don Sutton. I pitched against Don Sutton a couple times. This guy threw 200 innings 20 times. 20.
Yeah.
And, they say, well, is he Hall of Fame worthy? Are you out of your mind?
How's it even a question?
Oh, my God. I've heard people question it because, his qualitative numbers, his WAR, he only won 20 games. Oh, come on. Give it a break. They asked like 12 GMs after Don Sutton had retired, if you could pick Sandy Koufax or Don Sutton, who would you pick? 50% of them took Don Sutton. He's going to give you 200 innings 20 years in a row. You got 1,440 innings somebody has to pitch.
Yeah.
Sandy Koufax, as great as he was, had 5 good years. This guy had 23, So there's a place for quality and there's a place for quantity. And, when you're that's why, baseball goes through 750 pitchers in a year, 30 per club or 25 per club. I remember the 1983 Mets, we stunk. We went through 15 pitchers the whole year, and 3 of them were September call-ups. That's it.
You pitched with one of those pretty great Hall of Fame pitchers with the Mets early in your career, too, and Tom Seaver. And
oh, yeah.
That
one hurt the most. I mean, I know a lot of great players died, but I idolized Tom Seaver to the point where I feel like I lost a part of my youth when he passed away on August 31st.
Well,
I was in awe of the guy, absolutely in awe of him. And, it's funny, I remember the year is over, I'm thinking, geez, he didn't have a Tom Seaver kind of year. Go back and look. He pitched like 220 innings with like a 3-3 or something.
Yeah.
I tell you what, if the Mets had Tom Seaver in 84 and 85, I think we would have won the division both years. You're talking about a guy who was going to go out there every 5th day and throw 230, 240 innings with an ERA in the low 3s. That's the kind of guy that Dwight Gooden, Ron Darling, Sid Fernandez, all those guys could just line up right behind him. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, he went and had 2 really good years with the White Sox.
Oh, my God. Look at his years. Look at his years at 85. I mean, this guy, I think he was on the worst hitting team in the big leagues in 84, the White Sox. And look at his numbers. At 85, he threw 230-something innings with an ERA right over 3 in the American League with the DH.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if he was on our club at 84, 85, I'm convinced we would have won the World Series. If they had the wild card and Tom Seaver, forget it. It's over. So, Tom was one of the greatest pitchers that ever lived. And he was my idol. And it hurt so bad when I was in shock. I knew he had dementia. I know he wasn't well, but it shocked me when he died. Really did.
Well, my condolences to you and
thank you,
family and all of his fans, because I think a lot of people felt the same way that didn't get to play with him even. Let me ask you, Ed, before we finish up, I mean, you do have very strong feelings about the game today. If somebody came to you and said, I'm going to give you total control of our organization, and you felt you had a chance to change the direction of the game, would you do it?
Well, again, as I said, it's difficult the way the equipment is, the rules, the size of the ballparks. You can't just go out and play small ball. It's like a tidal wave. You'll get overwhelmed by home runs.
Mm-hmm.
But on the pitching side, I would try to train pitchers to be more starting pitchers in the minor leagues. Learn how to get through lineups 3 times. Learn how to get out of jams after the 5th or 6th inning. Learn how to pitch, not just throw. We really teach guys more how to throw and less how to pitch now.
Yeah.
And, it's all about velocity and spin rate and all those things, which is fine. I had a chance to run organizations the way I thought they should be run. And so I'm not going to, besmirch guys for doing it the way they think they should do it. But I would try to train pitchers in the minor leagues how to be starting pitchers, how to get through lineups 3 times. Because when you come to the big leagues, you shouldn't be getting hurt just because you throw 200 innings, unless you're 19 years old. So, that would be my main focus. The hitters, they're going to have to swing the way they swing. The baseball's like a golf ball. The ballparks are small. The strike zone is what it is. Generating runs through home runs is the way to go. But as I would try to do a better job of teaching starting pitchers how to get through lineups 3 times.
Is there a party that wants to do that?
What's that?
Is there part of you that would still want to do that? Jump back in the frame?
Yeah, but I'm an old man now, so I don't see. I mean, I'm 60. I'll be 65 years old next month, and the game has changed to the point where the young people now are running the game. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, Ed, look, I appreciate your time today. Went a little longer than I told you we'd go, so I appreciate you sticking around. You've been a great guest. I wish you a happy birthday next month. And
thank you. I appreciate it, Keith.
And I don't see 65 as old anymore, being 61 myself. So
neither do I. I'm just saying that to spit.
There was a time I saw it as ancient, but
yes.
But not anymore. So I want to thank you, Ed, and I wish you well in your endeavors today, and we thank you for the time and the memories you shared with us today.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, thank you. All right, guys, that's my interview with Ed Lynch. Ed has got some very strong opinions on the game today, obviously, as I do. We agree on a lot of stuff. We covered a lot of topics. I'm going to have that on again, I think. I think when we'll get him in to break down the current Mets. I wanted to get into the Mets a little bit, and we ran out of time, especially their issue with their own GM, how ugly that turned. But anyway, we had a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. The groups that get this, I hope you watch and enjoy it and share it and come and follow us. We're going to have more of these. Next week, I'll have Tom Keegan on. Tom is currently a writer for the Times of Northeast Indiana. I believe he's a sports writer. He's been a sports writer for decades. He's probably about my age, but Tom's worked for ESPN Radio in New York City. He worked for the Boston Herald. He worked for the New York Post for a time, the Baltimore Sun. Southtown in Chicago, and one of my favorite dead publications, The National. I loved The National back in the 80s. I think it was the 80s. What a great publication it was. It's too bad Frank DeFord, the great Frank DeFord, started that, and it's too bad it didn't make a go of it. But anyway, remember, Sunday we'll be on. We'll be talking NFL football championship Sunday. Lots of great matchups. Brady against Rodgers. Maybe Patrick Mahomes plays. It's going to be an interesting weekend. Bills, Chiefs are a great matchup. Tampa Bay and Packers are still a great matchup. Unsure how I'm going on any of these choices. All right, back with you. Hopefully you're still here. Guys, have a great Friday. As I was saying, see you Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Live. We're going to talk NFL football. We're going to update our playoff standings. Our TGI Sports Talk Playoff Challenge. Rick Sherlock currently in the lead. And we'll talk baseball, NFL, and more. See you then. Have a great weekend. Keith Engel, TGI Sports Talk, right here on the NESEP Northeast Streaming Sports Network. See you later. Bye-bye.